body. It's not entirely a real image of a person. 98% of those are pornographic. 99% of this is targeting women. What happens when this happens to you? You're about to find out from our panelists, who will talk in depth about their own experiences with what they have done to change and criminalize this act. But it causes severe emotional distress and mental health issues. Take yourself back to the scenario that I posed at the beginning. What would you do? What would your friends and colleagues think when they saw these? How would you feel? This is very traumatic for anyone who experiences it. But the good news is the UN recognizes this, and as of December of last year, 2024, a new resolution exists about the intersectionality of violence against women in the digital realm. The UN has woven together, of course I'm not going to read you the whole text of this, many different human rights treaties and proclamations explaining that all of these call for an end to this type of abuse for women. That said, I want to introduce our expert panel, starting at the very end here with Ms. 𝗕𝗂𝗰𝗵𝗹𝗶. 𝗕𝗂𝗰𝗵𝗹𝗶 is a distinguished global policy advocate with 2 decades of experience supporting survivors of sex trafficking and image-based violence. As a co-founder of Alecto AI and chief of Impact, she champions a survivor-centered approach embodied in her ethos, "There is no about us without us." Andrea is a founding member and advocacy lead of STISA, hopefully I'm saying that correctly.
I think so.
Connecting survivors with technology to enhance helplines and care. She is also a policy advisor on image-based sexual abuse for the Joyful Heart Foundation. Her social justice memoir, Believe Me, chronicles her journey serving incarcerated survivors as the founder and former executive director of Fair Girls. Andrea has served and worked alongside over 2,000 survivors of sex trafficking globally, advocating for their rights and healing. Welcome, Andrea. Our next panelist, 𝗲𝗄𝗄, who has been very busy in the last few weeks, having spoken at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and alongside Melania Trump about the Take It Down Act, which she will talk more about shortly. In April 2020, 𝗲𝗄𝗄 faced a horrifying discovery. Someone had created a deepfake pornographic video of her. Devastated and humiliated, she initially felt powerless, but 𝗲𝗄𝗄 didn't let this violation define her. Instead, she embarked on a mission to change the system and protect others from similar abuse. Unable to get help from law enforcement, 𝗲𝗄𝗄 took matters into her own hands and founded Alecto AI, a company developing free-to-use facial recognition software. This tool will empower victims to identify and remove fake and abusive content, fighting technology with technology. And next we have Noelle Martin. Noelle is a lawyer and lecturer on image-based sexual violence, holding a Bachelor of Laws and Arts degree from, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Macquarie University, and Master of Laws from the University of Western Australia. She was admitted as a lawyer in Western Australia in 2020 and worked at the Supreme Court of Western Australia and the Department of Justice. Currently, she researches at UWA Law School with Australian government scholarship support. For over a decade, Noelle has fought against image-based sexual abuse after becoming a target of fake pornographic images and deepfakes. Her advocacy helped criminalize non-consensual intimate image distribution across Australia, working alongside attorneys general and landmark legislative changes. Her global impact spans media appearances from the New York Times to the BBC, and advisory roles with the World Economic Forum's Digital Justice Project. She was recognized as Young Western Australian of the Year in 2019, Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia honoree in 2019, and featured on Marie Claire's 2023 Power List. Martin's research focuses on the metaverse implications, collaborating with Associate Professor Julia Powles, with their work featured again in the Financial Times, MIT Technology Review, and on multiple international broadcasts. And we finally have Susanna Gibson, who is the founder of My Own Image. Susanna Gibson is a nurse practitioner and former Democratic candidate for the Virginia House of Delegates. During her campaign, she became the victim of the non-consensual creation and distribution of intimate recordings. Sensationalist media led by the Washington Post amplified the harm, triggering online abuse, death threats, and stalking. Determined to fight back, and and fight back she has. Susanna founded My Own Image, a nonprofit combating technology-facilitated violence, image-based sexual abuse, and disinformation. She advocates for stronger laws, empowers survivors, and raises awareness of IBSA's devastating impact. Internationally recognized for her advocacy, she challenges cultural stigmas and fights for a safer, more equitable world. And finally, we have Dr. 𝗕𝗂𝗰𝗵𝗹𝗶, who's a researcher at 𝗦𝗶𝗹𝗃𝗃𝗃 de Madrid. I don't speak Spanish, forgive my pronunciation. She also works with the European Commission and is an author of the book on revenge porn. She's a pre-recorded video panelist and unfortunately could not be here today, but she's an Italian sociologist, researcher, and digital rights activist specializing in online gender-based violence and online harms, holding a PhD in sociology from the University of Milan, and has conducted extensive research on digital sexual violence. So, that said, I want to circle back on what we said, what you would do with those images. Does anyone want to take a stab at answering that question in the audience? What would you do? Anybody?
Well, now that I know these people, I'd contact them.
Great answer. There you are. Yes, absolutely. And they do have resources for you. So we've moved into the realm of understanding that, and I want to go to our panelists and say, what are the most concerning trends in terms of the rise of image-based sexual violence, primarily with the advancements of AI? We'll start with Susanna.
I don't know if I turned it on. No, there you go. Yeah, so this is something that I've been watching closely for about the past year or so, and started paying attention to it really when Taylor Swift had her AI-generated, digitally forged intimate images or deepfakes in, what was it, January of 2024, something like that. And I started watching the media really kind of go after, and our society really go after focusing on deepfakes, digitally forged, right? And I've been growing increasingly concerned, actually, because I think that it's really setting up kind of this good victim, bad victim dichotomy. So you see there's an incredible amount of focus on deepfakes and AI technology, which, by the way, I think is great. It's bringing attention to the problem of image-based sexual abuse. But by hammering that home, and you see, even like with Take It Down, when you see some of these, there was a CNN reporter that wrote something just 2 weeks ago about Take It Down, and they said Ted Cruz's, bill attacking AI deepfakes. Well, no, the bill is actually addressing both, right? It's addressing authentically or created or real images additionally. And so I think one of the most concerning things that I've seen and I've been watching is this really narrow focus on deepfakes, this kind of good victim, well, they didn't do anything to deserve it, versus bad victim of, well, didn't you know you shouldn't have sent that image to your partner or partners? And I've gotten phone calls from several people across the country, including young teenage girls, one in particular right now I'm helping in Arkansas, who had sent some pictures via Snapchat to what she thought was her boyfriend, who then held up his phone, FaceTimed her from another device, and showed her as he was sending these images out. And the police in Arkansas essentially kind of laughed at her and blamed her and said, well, you could be charged with child pornography, with the creation of which. Actually, looking at Arkansas law, he's correct. She could be. But what she was telling to her mother is, I deserve this. It's not like someone made deepfakes of me, right? And so I think this message is something that our young, like the younger generation is really watching and absorbing. And so I think, just to wrap up in closing, I think we really need to make sure we're not erasing or ignoring victims of authentically created images as well.
Thanks, Susanna. Noelle?
So is this on? It's on. So just to, I want to talk about the amazing insights that Susanna's just said from a perspective of someone who's also been targeted by deepfake abuse and altered intimate images, and the notion of who is really the ideal and perfect victim. because I think my views are a little bit different, but I want to answer the question posed in terms of what are the concerning trends about this issue. Well, I think some of the biggest concerning trends are the ease, the accessibility, the affordability, and the permissibility to be able to create, distribute, and store these kinds of images and videos. We're dealing with a situation where just in the last couple of years, the biggest deepfake abuse sites have amassed billions of views. We're seeing the rise of nudify apps that essentially allow people to upload an image of an ordinary woman and it will churn out naked images of that woman. And some of these apps primarily work on women's bodies. We're seeing the popularization of generative AI, which can allow people to generate intimate material of someone through simple text prompts. So there's a range of factors and just how easy it is, how accessible it is, how affordable it is, all compounds to creating this like massive global scale problem. But on the issue of notions of ideal, perfect victimhood, I do agree with what Susanna said. I think where you have victims who are targeted by AI generated abuse, there's this idea that they didn't do anything wrong as opposed to the people that might have shared that. That's how society treats women in particular, because there's this stigma around women's sexuality. However, what I would say is that, having fought this for a very, very long time, the dominant form of this abuse for many years was the distribution of authentic intimate images. That was the primary form of this abuse. As someone who had experienced doctored intimate images and fighting for that kind of abuse to be taken seriously, what I was met with was that it wasn't real and therefore it wasn't harmful. So that was the challenge that I faced. And I think in part of it is true about this idea of like such a shame that women get with their sexuality, which is so unacceptable. And there are also different challenges that you have when you've got doctored intimate imagery, this lack of taking it seriously. But I think, in America, in particular, and just the context of the Take It Down Act, and maybe who was sponsoring it, there's other elements there that I think we can all understand as to why certain victims are pedestaled over others, and that absolutely should be challenged. So that's what I would say on that point.
Thank you, Noelle. Breeze?
So I think both Susanna and Noelle brought really great points, and I really appreciate you bringing up the perfect victim example, because there is no perfect victim. It's all about consent. And I think the rising trend that we need to be concerned about is that even if you are the perfect victim, you are still very helpless. So I'll tell you a little bit, and even for those people who understand the system, you can still get abused. No one is free from this kind of abuse. And I'll tell you a little bit about my background in technology. So I went to UC Berkeley, majored in peace and conflict studies. When I was an undergrad at Berkeley, I wrote the Wikipedia page on how Islamic State weaponized social media platforms to advance their agenda. And my first job in the tech industry was actually on the trust and safety team at a big tech company. My mentor was the one who wrote YouTube's content policy 14 years ago. And I helped to design the system of trust and safety, and it still happened to me. And I'm still the target of weaponized technology myself. Before I founded Alecto AI, I was a very successful venture capitalist in the tech industry. I was Sam Altman's investor, and I'm still in my 20s. And if you could believe, all of these, it's still happening to me. That really means no one is going to be completely safe from this. And to add a little bit of point is that this is not new. This form of misogyny is not new. And I'll share a little bit about my great-grandmother's story. So my great-grandmother was born in 1908 during the last year of the Qing dynasty in China. And when she was a child, she had to go through this thing called foot binding, which was designed to it was a custom that lasted for over 1,000 years in China, and it was designed to limit women's mobility and freedom in the world. And my great-grandmother never learned how to read or write. She never left her hometown because of foot binding. And then what I realized is that deepfake and online image abuse, this is a new form of foot binding. It's a digital foot binding. Because when women like Susanna try to speak up and run for office, there's people try to silence her. And when I am thriving in technology, people try to silence me with deepfake abuse and online image abuse. So I think this is something we need to really be aware of, that as much as the world had changed, something that actually never changed. And there's a lot of work that we still need to do.
Thank you, Louise, that was powerful. Andrea.
Thank you. So I wanted to, say I agree with everything my colleagues here are saying. I wanted to back us up a little bit and offer some kind of candor from my perspectives. I'm very old here on this panel, but when I was a teenager, I was sexually assaulted and exploited. And what I did, that 10:30 a.m. question, was nothing. I kept my mouth shut. And the reason for that is I did the calculations. I looked at law enforcement and thought, I don't think they're gonna help me. I looked at my classmates and thought, they're definitely gonna slut shame me. And I went on about my business and I buried it deep inside myself. We can get into the psychology of why I went into this field later. But nonetheless, I know from statistics and from my own experience, being a woman, having a lot of female friends, that here in this room there are many other survivors. And whether or not you chose to speak up was really, should have been, if it was not, up to you. The thing about image-based sexual abuse is that oftentimes other people know about your sexual assault before you do. A lot of other people. And so that silence, which never felt like a privilege before, but more of a ticking time bomb in my case, became somewhat of a privilege. Fast forward, and I started working with survivors, predominantly young women and girls of color in the DC area who are survivors of sex trafficking. And pimps, like everyone else, started using the internet to market and sell their product. And so you would have intimate images, in this case it was predominantly real images, videos that were created, one, to have coercive control over the girl, you do this or I send this to your family, and two, to market and sell them. So after girls would come to me, part of our process at my previous organization was to work to get those images down. And we were almost never successful, and here's why. It's not that big a deal, law enforcement would say, or the prosecutors say, I've got other things to do, or the tech company would say, that's right, they never responded. So the thing is, it was considered sort of this other thing. It wasn't real sexual violence. But it is. Because it is, as my colleague said, it's about consent. It's about your privacy, not someone else's privacy. Your body is not someone else's domain. But the thing is, as we ignored it in so many other forms around sexual violence, we're now at this turning point in which sexual predators can actually, with just the flip of a switch, completely annihilate someone's future. And when we think about that, and I know that was a little dark, but it is in fact the reality. And increasingly, we need to see law and policy step up to the plate where survivors are currently standing. We need to see tech companies not hide behind their user agreements, but actually center their user themselves and their humanity. And as we're thinking about how we're going to respond to this as a society, because whether it's an authentic image or it's an altered image, it is still someone's real life and there's real harms. And it doesn't just stop. When we think about my own experience as a survivor, I certainly have PTSD. I jump like some kind of ninja, someone sneaks up behind me. But when you're going through image-based sexual abuse, there's no P. It's just constant and continuous. And I think and that's not minimizing all of the healing work my colleagues and so many others have done, but it is a different dynamic. It requires a different response. And I drew this little weird thing. So when I would train law enforcement about trafficking, we would make a triangle. You've got the trafficker, you've got the buyer, or the serial predator, whatever you want to call them, and you have the victim. I'm using that word in this case. But when you're talking about image-based sexual abuse, you've got the abuser, sometimes it's trafficking. You've got the demand, the consumer, the bystander, that other person that sees it, does nothing, shares it, stores it, alters it even. And real images can become synthetic images. You've got the victim, but now look, it's a square. You've got the tech companies. And so we have to decide in our society how we're going to hold everyone accountable so that no one has to go through this again.
Thank you, Andrea, that was powerful. And we all love a good visual too. It really helps everyone understand the dynamics. So we do have a panelist who is in Italy currently, and so we want to.
The evolution of technology has always been accompanied by
Sylvia.
harms and kind of violence against women. And this is because technology is really political, and we should understand it as inherently political and maybe as also a political battlefield. For a very long time, we have thought that technology was neutral, that we could have used it for bad or good independently. And I think that we are witnessing a political moment in which it's clear that it's not like this. Even symbolically speaking, we are seeing who are the owners of technology. We are seeing their intentions. We are also understanding their visions of the world and their political goals. So using this technology to impose more control and more power on our bodies, on our voices, and on our experiences. So when we discuss artificial intelligence and its potential harms, we shouldn't just focus on one type of violence, but we should understand it broadly as, again, a political battlefield where our rights are at stake right now. So for me, technology has to be feminist, and this means that we need to regulate it through feminist approaches. If this doesn't happen, we will only witness a continuous evolution of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies as a way to scare us, to control us, to censor us, and to humiliate us, because this has always happened. The fact is that now, as women, we are realizing this, and of course, in the moment in which we started to realize, there was also a backlash against us, a misogynist backlash, and this is what is happening right now. So technology is much more than just a tool. Right now, it's a political goal, in my opinion. And so I can just think that if we don't start to have this conversation more seriously, we just continue to witness new type of evolution of technology that can be really, really scary and concerning.
That was Sylvia. So I want to move on next to, we've talked a lot about what AI can bring, what the new evolutions of technology can bring. But there are ethical and legal implications to this in terms of victim advocacy. And so I want to turn back to the panelists again. If you have personal experience, which most of you do, with non-consensual intimate imagery, how did the current legal system help or hinder your ability to get justice? And from your experience, what practical changes need to be made? Andrea did start to outline this, so let's expand upon that. Let's start with Susanna.
Oh God, yeah. So when I found out that there were recordings and images of me, I was completely lost. To go back to your question, what would you do? I have no idea, right? I'm a mom, I'm a nurse practitioner, I ran for office because I cared deeply about abortion. I never wanted to be in politics, right? So this is kind of the landscape I entered. And when I found out that there were images that had been created of me, I had absolutely no legal recourse. People who did this live overseas. But for people who didn't live overseas, about, I don't know, maybe a month after I found out about these images in general, about 10 days or so before my election, the Republican Party of Virginia, the official Republican Party of Virginia, the chair, Rich Anderson, who just got a Trump they decided that they would take screenshots of these non-consensual recordings of me and crop them and mail them out on paid political mailers to thousands of voters in and out of my district, just to make sure that everyone was fully aware, in case you had missed all the news, right? They literally took non-consensual intimate images of a female candidate and put them on paid political mailers. And it was legal in Virginia because they cropped them so that you could not see my nipples, genitals, or buttocks, but they were incredibly explicit in nature, and accompanied with all the crazy headlines that the Daily Wire decided to write. And it was perfectly legal, right? So, and this is why my organization is focused on state laws. What we did, my organization, not even 4 months later, was we worked with some of the Virginia legislators that we have connections and known relationships with, and we amended Virginia's law because it used to say you have to be able to show the nipples, genitals, or buttocks for it to be a crime. No longer does it say that, so they can't do that anymore to another female candidate. So now it just has to be an image that is sexually explicit or obscene in nature. And so when we're talking about how did the legal system help or hinder, I have no legal recourse towards them, but I've been able to change the law to make sure they can't do it.
Susanna became the law.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah, so on this question, how the legal system helped or hindered me, my abuse has gone on for a very, very long time, and it started before I found out that was happening to me. But like well over a decade, I've been targeted consistently and increasingly for years. And when I discovered what was happening to me when I was a teenager, it was at a time when the laws, there were no specific laws in Australia in my jurisdiction about this issue. The term image-based sexual abuse hadn't even been coined yet. Deepfake abuse wasn't an issue that was in the media at all. So I had an experience where like it just wasn't being talked about and it wasn't being, no one knew about it really. And I also didn't know who was targeting me, and you know, to this day I don't know who was targeting me. So there were so many elements to my specific case that made it harder and almost impossible for any kind of response from the legal system or the justice system. So in my case, there was no access or no prospect of justice. And so I had to do kind of what, you know, Susanna did with the law reform, is I had to fight back for justice all across Australia. And, you know, be involved in that process because there was no prospect of justice for me, and of course it was bigger than me. But now we have laws in Australia that criminalise this abuse, and we have a regulator in Australia that's tasked with trying to take things down on behalf of victims. Now that we have that response, the question I ask is, if that was available to me at the time it was happening, would there be any kind of justice? And the answer is no. We have laws now in multiple jurisdictions that are coming up, and they are not going to help victims in any meaningful way, and if they do, it's only in limited circumstances. So if you know who the perpetrator is, if they're in the same jurisdiction, you're more likely to get some kind of justice. If you don't know who's responsible, they're halfway around the world. What justice can the jurisdiction that you have provide for you? So the challenge that we have is dealing with the global and borderless nature of this issue. It's actually not just trying to get laws implemented, it's also to make sure that they are enforced to the extent that they can be. Because the situation that we have in Australia is that we have a more robust legal and justice system in relation to this issue, but that's such a basic superficial step. The big challenge that we have is how they can work in practice. Can they actually provide justice to victims? this is a bigger issue. It's a collective harm, and you have an ecosystem in place where people are making money from this abuse, where tech companies are allowing this discoverability of this abuse. You know, Google search engine direct traffic to it. Payment processors such as Visa and MasterCard have facilitated the abuse of this material, the exchange of this material, sorry. You've got social media companies that allow links to sites to appear on their platforms. This system, this supply chain, this industry is so much bigger. And so individual justice is not going to be enough going forward. And so I guess I'm trying to work on that global response that is needed if we're going to tackle this issue.
You do raise a point about how at each stage victims are failed by not only the law but the tech companies as well. Speaking of tech companies, 𝗲𝗄𝗏 is our resident expert on the tech industry. 𝗲𝗏.
Yeah, so I mean, my story, it was absolutely insane. So because I come from a background where I understand the system, and so in 2020, I received a phone call from my college gay best friend, and he said, you need to drop everything, and there's a video of you on Pornhub. And at first, I was like, what are you even talking about? I've never visited Pornhub. But when I clicked the link, I saw my face on a pornographic video, and it was so devastating, and all of my knowledge about the tech industry, that's not what I'm thinking, like when you saw that. I just didn't want to live anymore. So I went to the rooftop, and I was trying to end my life that day. And but I talked about my great-grandmother. I mean, I thought about her, and that's why I didn't kill myself that day. But what happened afterwards was absolutely crazy. So I'm well educated, okay, and went to UC Berkeley and speak multiple languages, and I was a venture capitalist, for God's sake. And when I went to the police asked me, have you ever engaged in prostitution? Are you a prostitute? Do you ever exchange money for sexual images or videos of yourself? I invested in 𝗲𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗃. I don't need to exchange money for sex. I mean, just think about it, how ridiculous it was. And if this is happening to me, a well-educated venture capitalist, investor of 𝗲𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗃, how many other people have experienced this? Let us ask ourselves. How many teenagers who have been, sextorted? How many of them actually have the resources or, the ability to deal with that? If I felt like I wanted to kill myself, no wonder our kids are, teenagers are killing themselves, and they are dying. So that's why we have a huge problem. And my story didn't just end there. So the police, obviously, they closed the case, and I decided to reach out to every single nonprofit organization I could find, and only one responded, and after a few exchanges of emails, they completely ghosted me. Which I understand they're probably overwhelmed, but for someone who was in significant mental distress, that was not a very good move. And I also, at that point, I was just feeling like, I was facing the wall everywhere I go. And then a few years later, and then that's why I founded Alecto AI. So in 2022, I believe, that's when I met Andrea, and that's how we, that's where I truly find hope. So in 2024, 23, okay, yeah. But so we met in 2023, but so in 2024, the beginning of 2024, there is a huge New York Times article about me by 𝗕𝗂𝗀𝗃𝗃, and we have been working on that story for a year, and then I always knew there's more videos and images of myself out there, and but because of this New York Times article, it's going to be the first time I use my real name and my face on that article, so I decided to dig a little deeper. And with Andrea's help, we, I think she should be the one to tell the story, because first of all, it's too traumatizing for me to explain that, And also, it was a hell of a good story. Yeah.
We'll let Andre do that. I don't think
So
that brings.
we'll take it from there. Before I get started though, I wanted to share something. I have an odd sense of humor, I guess, but I was at another tech conference and I just had this idea and I ran a search on Google, speaking of Google, how to strangle a kitten. And Google came back and said, don't do that. Call a humane society, don't kill cats, that, you're so bad, you know, all that, basically. Then I Googled how to make a deep fake of my girlfriend. And I got a whole bunch of free tools, tips, and access to links to websites where I could post said content. So my question to Google executives that day was, do you value cats more than women? Because it kind of seems like it. And I bring that up, I haven't tried that trick in a while, so it may no longer work if you try it. But I bring that up because I started to realize, and Noelle was really getting to this as well, it's not enough to think of one perpetrator. Image-based sexual abuse is organized crime. That abuser cannot do this without technology, cannot do it without apps, cannot do it without other people helping them, supporting them, and profiting off of this. And that's something that, you know, I think about when working with law enforcement is we have to expand the concept of commercial. So if we're talking about sex trafficking, it's any commercial act. And by the way, as I'm not sure where I fit this in elsewhere, but regardless of your background, where you come from, if you're a woman of color, if you're transgender, if you are a sex worker, no one should have their privacy violated, no one should have their consent violated in this way. But law enforcement, oftentimes, they're looking for how to make the best case. And so when they're thinking about that commercial, they're thinking of money. But just like in sex trafficking, image-based sexual abuse, oftentimes the profitability is in likes, clicks, brands, shares, even reputational values. So we have to kind of expand that notion as we're thinking about the ecosystem that enables image-based sexual abuse. So getting back to 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏 and I's discovery. So this became quite like the international escapade. So we had colleagues in the UK, who I think do not want to be named, who ran a search for us and came back with about 852 unique distinctive URLs that contain 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏's abuse imagery.
Wow.
So we first reached out to the same nonprofit that she previously reached out to ask for help, and they ultimately said we cannot help you because some of those images might be when 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏 was a minor. So then we went to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they have a very clear mandate. I have tremendous respect for them, but they were unable to help because they said some of those images of 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏 might be from when she was an adult. So, okay, so fast forward, and we're in Paris for the Paris Peace Forum, and our colleagues at the French hotline, Point de Contact, were there, and I started looking at them, thinking about what's going on. I was like, hey, I know you're supposed to only work in France, but would you mind helping us? And they, without a doubt, said yes. So they took the case on, and we thought, good, we're done, right? No. So it turns out there's 142 unique URLs of 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏's content stored on Microsoft Azure. So Point of Contact has a trusted relationship with Microsoft. They were unresponsive. We even had colleagues from the White House, reaching out to Microsoft.
We've met the president multiple times.
Prior president. So we just wanted to zoom in on that. So it started to feel pretty helpless. But then fast forward, there's TrustCon, which is a big tech conference that focuses on, as you would imagine, trust and safety in San Francisco. So we went for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons was that I had a feeling that they had a trust and safety at Microsoft would be there. So I waited in the lobby. The reason I waited in the lobby, and we waited, and there she was. She was getting lunch with colleagues. We waited. As she was getting up to leave, we approached her, and I basically had to say, you see that person sitting over there? That's 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏. That's 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏's URLs. Take them down, please. And they did within a couple of days, and that's amazing, right? When we got the email, both of us were just like shocked after 10 months of fighting, ridiculous amount of fighting, and resources that almost no other victim would have.
Yeah, meeting the president of the United States twice.
And so, what struck us, I hope it's okay, I'm using me language here, but what struck us is where in the ecosystem was there a system fail? If Microsoft is a part of a network of stop NCII, if Microsoft has trusted relationships with hotlines and helplines, where from there to the head of trust and safety, who reacted immediately when we approached her, where along the way did the system fail, and where does law and policy step in? Because it's not enough. I'm a big advocate for this piece of legislation, the Take It Down Act. I'm particularly interested in this feature of the bill that would require within 48 hours, like to be fewer, from the images being reported, that platforms have to take them down. But that's good, and that's incremental change. But how are we going to actually regulate and implement that? How are we going to understand in that ecosystem, again, that Microsoft received information knowing that they should take Breeze's content down? How are we going to know it actually happened? How is there going to be regulation and accountability? And so as we're thinking about what would someone do, what laws and policies would or wouldn't help, one, it's important to recognize the wins when we get them, and Noelle's right, the legislation in Australia, there's a lot to be applauded for. But there's a long way to go, and we're dealing with this age-old problem of constantly having to demonstrate that survivors should be believed, and believe is a verb, not a feeling, and how we're going to hold that to account. So I'll close with this. All of us here on this panel have been working very hard to create a global survivor Bill of Rights. And I am tasked with getting the 42 rights down to about 15, and actually tried using ChatGPT, but it got super weird. I don't think it was very good. It said some really strange things to me, but nonetheless, I think that we're at the eye of the storm of this field. Sexual violence is not new, and imagery sexual abuse is sexual violence, but the speed in which it can proliferate with technology is the problem.
Thank you all, that was very powerful. And our final input on this question is Sylvia.
So just like most of the most brilliant advocates that you will find all around the globe working on image-based sexual abuse, I am a survivor of non-consensual discrimination with fake images. And when this happened to me in 2017 in Italy, there was no law protecting me and women in general from this type of violence. Overall, the public discourse was really victimizing. It was still restating the idea of revenge pornography, so a lot of slut shaming and victim blaming was happening around cases that became public. So I started to work on this topic, first as a researcher and also as an activist, making myself interested in change and deregulation. So very shortly, I started to do research on Telegram groups and channels to try to understand the impact that this type of violence had on women, but also to understand who were the perpetrators. So I came out with this research on the importance of masculinities and reconstruction of masculinities around gender-based violence online. And that served to promote a campaign in Italy to ask for a law to criminalize non-consensual discrimination on the internet images. A law that was approved in 2019 thanks to the campaign, which at its core had the idea of consent, of sexual freedom, but also the regulation of platforms and technologies that were contributing to exposing women. Unfortunately, not all of our points were welcomed by this regulation, but today victims have now a law which contains a gender dimension to protect themselves. The only pity and the only lack from this law is that somehow it still contains the idea of revenge porn, so victims still are obliged to show and demonstrate that they were harmed on purpose, and that's not what happens, for example, with this type of groups. There we need to focus on this idea of joke among men with sexualizing and objectifying others. So there is lots to do still in the next years to make this law better, and not just in Italy, but let me say in Europe in general. There are so many changes that are coming. First and foremost with the PSA, but also the European Directive on Gender Against Violence. So I'm sure there will be important changes, and it will be the time to have our voices be heard and participate into this type of discussions.
So we've come to understand through the course of this panel that combating image-based sexual abuse is a systemic failure on the part of tech companies who refuse to remove images in a reasonable amount of time. And what even defines a reasonable amount of time? Immediately is the only reasonable time. It's a failure on the part of law enforcement to not understand or have the training to work with women who've experienced these issues, as all of our panelists can attest. And in many ways, as Andrea told me in a separate interview, to quote you, this is a society problem. It's a culture problem. It's a culture of share onward, laugh at the victim blaming. So we are looking down a pretty big abyss here, everyone. How do we get out? And that leads into my next question for our panelists. What policy and technological advancements are needed to combat this issue effectively? Because it is quite clear that it is not only law. It is not only government. Government is notoriously slow with combating technology abuse. So what policy and technological advancements are needed to combat this issue effectively? Suzanne, I will start with you.
Yeah, so my organization, it's called My Own Image, and we're focused on state level policy changes, and really on non-consensual distribution of intimate images. You know, federal bills, federal laws are great if they're used, but unfortunately, because our society does not value women, or violence against women is not a priority, even if Take It Down passes, even if SHIELD passes, these are these federal bills that are working their ways through Congress, they're only going to be used in the most egregious of cases. Federal prosecutors are not going to use these tools to prosecute and hold people accountable for their actions. I've even spoken with a federal prosecutor who works on sex crimes a few days ago, and she said, yeah, these are best prosecuted in states. I can't imagine the feds actually using this. And we were talking about Take It Down. I think Take It Down, federal legislation is great as a symbolic, you know, kind of a symbol to society about what is acceptable and what is not. But in terms of like what is actually going to be effective, it's state level policy changes, or where people are going to be held accountable. It's prosecutors, Commonwealth attorneys, even attorney generals, but federal legislation is actually not going to be effective. It is the shiny, bright thing that everyone chases because everyone wants to say they've testified on Capitol Hill. But what's actually going to be effective is working with your state and local government. So I would say that that is number one, expanding intent, fleshing out intent. We created model policy for states on this because so many states like Virginia, as it was intent to intimidate, harass, coerce. Pennsylvania's it's to humiliate, harass, or do something else that was completely asinine. It's not effective. And that's like that in a lot of places. A lot of states also have, you have to be a current or former sexual partner to be someone who can commit this crime. So if you are a neighbor or a friend or a colleague and you distribute non-consensual imagery of someone and you live in that state, it's not a crime. So, you know, yeah. So expanding intent and removing barriers like that to be able to allow victims to actually access justice is great. Just to piggyback a little bit off of what all of them said, you know, when it comes to what is actually going to be effective, chasing technology is not going to be the answer, right? It helps you remove imagery, but it doesn't fix the problems. Technology is going to continue to evolve, and we're going to find new ways to harm each other. What actually needs to happen is it needs to be made socially unacceptable to do this. Just like smoking, right? Like I grew up in the 90s wearing cargo pants and flannel shirts and smoking cigarettes, and it used to be the cool thing to do, and now it's just not. And I think public education campaigns and making people understand that this is sexual violence is gonna be the most effective way to actually prevent this, right? We're never gonna be able to prevent it, so.
Thank you, Susanna. Noelle?
So I was going to address two things that have been mentioned, but I won't. I'll just answer the question. Sorry. So in terms of like the utility of technological solutions, and it is something that I have been fighting against for a very, very long time, which is in these discussions the primacy of removal as a solution to tackle this problem. We often hear about, you know, how companies can remove this faster and more quickly, how they can identify and then remove, and what technologies they can use. But we have to understand that this abuse and the consequences of this abuse are lifelong. They don't just impact a person at the time they discover it or when it's really happening. They manifest over time. That can be impacts to your employability, to your future earning capacity, to your interpersonal relationships, your romantic relationships. Every part of your life can be impacted by this. So when we talk about issues to do with removal and technological solutions to improve how fast things are removed, that does a complete disservice to survivors, because, you know, when I was experiencing and discovering the brunt of my abuse, that's what I wanted. Because you're in a period of distress and you think that that's what you really need or want to tackle this problem. Then years later you realise you can't get jobs and you can't get employed. And so it is just not enough I think we need to change the way we talk about it and stop putting removal and technological solutions on a pedestal. Because, you know, as Susanna said, but as I've been talking about for many, many years, we need to tackle the root causes of this problem if we're actually going to tackle it. And removal is such a superficial and futile response. And although it has utility, because yes, some people need it taken down, and yes, it will help, and yes, it can, you know, alleviate a lot of distress from victims, it is A, not going to help that individual, because it can resurface, it can be stored, it can come up again, and B, it's not going to actually make any difference collectively. And so, you know, talked about cultural harm, and that's something that's come from the scholarship. And so this removal and this focus on removal doesn't actually tackle the problem. So it's futile, it's superficial. Yes, it might help a little bit, but it's really not going to tackle the problem. So getting to the root cause, understanding the role that misogyny plays, understanding the role that, like the impunity of these technology companies, how that influences this issue, and why people are doing this. So just for example, the research has shown that people who perpetrate this abuse, particularly the men, they don't even consider the autonomy of the people that they're targeting. They have a disregard for their autonomy. So they're doing this because they can, they're doing this because they're allowed to, and they don't care about the people that they're targeting. So what can we do to tackle this problem? It's not just let's remove it. Like, it really irritates me. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Noelle. Breeze?
Okay, so I think I'm kind of in a very interesting position here because I somehow represent the tech industry. And I feel like, I mean, this is not going to go well, but I love you. But so I do agree with Noelle and Susanna that we actually, the way I think about it is that this is a systemic problem and it requires a systemic solution. While the technology itself does not provide all the help, but I do believe it is tech-enabled, so we do need tech-enabled solutions out there to combine with legislative efforts, survivor support, everything. So I mean, one does not stand alone with another. And I mean, through my work in trust and safety, I mean, I know that there are good people in the industry, in the tech industry, that wanted to do good things, but their hands are tied. And that's why I started 𝗕𝗂𝗀𝗃𝗃. I do believe 𝗕𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃 is part of the solution. So imagine what I had been through. It took 10 months. And so Andrea and I, we are both very impactful, and we have connections at the White House. If we really wanted to, like, name dropping and, just like get my images removed immediately, there are ways that we can do it. But I choose, like, to go through the normal, like, ordinary, accessible way, because I wanted to see how hard it is. And even though it nearly killed me, but I mean, I still I wanted to experience and walk, like, a mile in the shoes of others. And then it proved to me that, the system is very broken. And that's why I started 𝗕𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃. So what we are doing is to proactively help you to detect and remove abusive content of you, if there is any out there. And we work directly with the platforms. And on our app, we also have resources such as legal resources and mental health support. So this is like all-in-one-place solution. And that we try to do our best to provide what is needed out there. But although we realize that it might not be enough, that there's so much work to do. We need to change the system, we need to change the culture, we need to change the perception. But I mean, I do believe it's a very necessary first step to at least start to address this problem. And so this idea was actually inspired by the nuclear deterrence theory. So I do believe that when the technology is really on the rise, and AI is kind of like the development of nuclear technology. You cannot use stones and swords to fight nuclear technology. You need to use magic to defeat magic. And that's why we're using an AI for good solution to combat AI-generated abuse and technology-generated abuse all together. And I wanted to also, to close up on my remark, to go back to history. I always go back to my great-grandmother. So she, aside from going through foot binding and everything, she's a very resilient woman. She also survived smallpox, and that left her face permanently disfigured. In a society where a woman's value was largely determined by her appearance, that means she could only marry into a poor family. And she lived through the wars, the change of regimes, the collapse of an empire, and my great-grandfather actually starved to death in a famine, and then my great-grandmother had to raise 3 children alone. So, but after 117 years after she was born, I get to stand here, speak to you today, tell my story. And that itself demonstrates that this world can change. We can change the culture. If we can end smallpox, we can end this. If we can end foot binding, this tradition, this brutal tradition that lasted for longer than 1,000 years, we can end this. We can truly change. So don't let any setback discourage you. I have been fighting for this for a very long time, although not nearly as long as 𝗕𝗏 or Susanna, but I am hopeful. And I do believe that the future is bright.
That was profound. Thank you, Louise. That was wonderful. Andrea?
So there's not a whole lot left to say, but I wanted to be I'm a storyteller. So we talked earlier about Taylor Swift. And just because she's famous and has all the resources in the world doesn't mean she signed up to have her name be synonymous with what is often called fake porn. It's not porn, because that's a separate consenting adult activity. But nonetheless, what is often not reported or known is that the bodies that were attached to Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, and Billie Eilish's faces were often the bodies of sex trafficking victims from a case called Girls Do Porn. So, what is Girls Do Porn, right? For those of you who have the luxury of not knowing, now you won't. But that case, it was a group of men, predominantly 2 men from New Zealand, who were targeting young women who were in the kind of 18, 19 range. Why? Because oftentimes law enforcement doesn't care once you turn 18 to look at you as a victim of trafficking. They look at you as a sex worker. So that is a discriminatory feature often of law enforcement. So, in a society really. So they targeted these women, offering like kind of like a fake modeling kind of setup and ad, and they were very skilled at figuring out which women, you know, were vulnerable, either because they were already in the modeling industry, because they looked like they needed money, because they responded to the ad at all. They would bring them to San Diego, where I currently live by happenstance, and then sexually assault them, film it, and put it on websites like Pornhub. They'd even make distinctive websites with the women's faces, names, addresses, anything to dox and figure out where they are. So they targeted over 400 women. The mistake they made is that one of them was a minor, and that's how law enforcement got interested, because the other 399, I guess, just weren't enough for them. So that case, those men were sentenced to the federal standard 14 years each. And at first I was like sitting there in the room with about 26 of these women as sentencing was rolled out a year and a half ago, and I thought to myself, 14 years? And then I thought about what it'd be like to be in a federal prison for 14 years, being a known perpetrator of such a crime. And, it'll be fine, the 14 years. But the real thing is, not just that these men went to prison, but what about all those other people who shared, who stored, who reproduced that content? When the images were removed, because they were removed off of Pornhub and other sites, obviously that wasn't the full solution, because the images then were used again to violate other individuals. And yes, these are famous individuals, but that's kind of beside the point. But I say all of this to say that we have to start thinking of this as a serious sex crime. Not as fake, not as just an image, but really thinking of it, even the term image-based sexual abuse, it doesn't quite do it for me yet. In South Korea, they say digital sex crime. I really tried to make that happen here, like people really didn't like it. But it really is a serious crime, and we can't keep looking at this from the image perspective. If we're going to shift culture, we have to start thinking of not as content, not as a user agreement, but as a society, we are not going to tolerate sexual violence. If you're sitting in a restaurant and a man walks up and strips a girl's clothes off, I'm pretty sure people will react pretty quickly to protect her, to hold him accountable. And yet when a guy says, hey, look at the nude my girlfriend sent me, what do you think all the other guys do? Probably at best they just kind of look the other way. But I think we have to start confronting this as a society. And I don't know what to call all those individuals who share, store, redistribute, or even just walk away.
Virginia
But
legislators, that's what you call them.
What?
Sorry. I said Virginia legislators.
There you go.
Almost every male member of the Virginia General Assembly watched, shared, and laughed at non-consensual imagery.
Which is the problem,
Right?
that demonstrates.
Correct.
Exactly.
That is exactly the problem, when their female colleague who they share an office space with and staff with, right, has this happen, and they say, I watched your video, and I don't believe you didn't know you were being recorded. There is a problem with that. When the next Attorney General of Virginia, who is a friend that you have relied on and known and has walked you through this entire process, has been there from pretty much the minute you found out there was images of you online, when they say, hey, Susanna, sorry, but 98% of the time this came up in the General Assembly, you know, over the fall, it was, well, it's not revenge porn, because that would only be if your husband had done that. Okay, and you're gonna be the next Attorney General of Virginia, right? And that's okay. And it's this culture, I wanna read you, sorry, I've been meaning to cut you off, but I think a lot of people don't understand why this is violence, and the kinds of people and violence that this opens up to. So I want to read you guys something I just pulled up on my phone. So a few months ago, it was right before my birthday, actually, Andrea and she was quite helpful in this too. I found out, someone randomly emailed me and said, hey, there are images of you up on this particular site. And I actually think that the person who emailed me is the person who's doing this. But, so I go to this site, and I go to this person's profile, and his name is 𝗲𝗄𝗃𝗃, and he has several manifestos, but this is a manifesto that I think really embodies what we're trying to get at here. It's called the Exposure Manifesto, and it says, and I'm going to quote and cuss, and my kids are in here and they've heard worse. Once a horse pics are uploaded to the internet, there is no going back. They will quickly be downloaded by hundreds, if not thousands, of horny viewers. Those viewers, in turn, will naturally save them to their computers, share them, post them elsewhere, and of course, blink off to them over and over again. Number 2, your exposure cannot be undone. If the exposed wishes to have her photos removed, she should read number 1 again. There is no way to truly recover what has been shown to thousands of others. It's best just to accept your exposure. All girls, women, sluts, cunts, and whores, sorry, Jessica, should always be exposed, shared, and objectified. If a bitch is sexually attractive, then she should accept her role in life as a sexual object. Expose often, expose early, preferably as the B turns 18. Doing this will allow her exposure, to Noelle's point, to last throughout her entire adult life and allow everyone to enjoy being slut. Okay, and it goes on, but I'll stop there. I think you guys get the point. But that is, in and of itself, one of the reasons that technology, yes, can help get these images removed, but it is not the answer. This person has a Go file, like a Dropbox file, if you will, that all you have to do is email him and ask him to share it, and he sends you. And the last time I checked, there were over 1,000 different women in his file, and not pictures, women, with dozens of pictures of each of them. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with. Men share and trade these images like baseball cards as a kind of currency and power, very similar to this kind of underground world of child sexual abuse material, right? Except for it's actually not an underground world. It is acceptable, or else sitting legislators would not feel empowered to share it and tell you that they've shared it, right? It is not necessarily underground. It is, socially acceptable, and that's really where we need to get at. We can't use technology to wipe every single person's computers of Go files of thousands of women. We can make it so if that happens, those women don't lose their jobs. They don't face social stigma. They don't have men shouting nasty things in the grocery store. 60% of victims of NCII have their identifying information posted with their images, their phone number, their address, their places of work, with encouragement to continue that doxing, which is where you post and publish someone's contact information and individual information, which is why you end up having 60% of victims are stalked online and 40% are stalked offline, in person, via the telephone. 40%, right? It is a significant threat to someone's safety and humanity and dignity. But when we allow people to lose their jobs, I lost my job as a nurse practitioner because, God forbid, my reputation for what? Right? Like, I'm a good nurse practitioner, very good nurse practitioner, because someone chose to commit sexual violence, but that's okay, right? Like, that is socially acceptable. Women lose their jobs all the time because of this.
Thank you, Susanna. That was very powerful. We will hear from Sylvia before we wrap up.
In line with my previous answer, I would say that we don't need necessarily technological advancement like this, but we need political advancement. We need to train our muscle of imagination and of utopia to believe that we can construct political alternatives around technology, because technology for me will be the main topic in the next few years. It's already there, so we as feminists need to organize and to provide real alternatives that are not just a matter of the problem from the surface, but that they lead from the nucleus of it.
I like that Sylvia's video was the final video for this question, because Sylvia talks about attacking this problem from the nucleus. And Andrea mentioned earlier that we were in the eye of the storm in terms of this. I do want to emphasize, for example, Susanna's children are here today. Her children have had to go through this at every turn with her. Andrea has a child as well. who has had to witness her making appearances and talking about these topics. So it isn't just the person that this affects, but it affects their entire family in ways that are unimaginable. But what I also want to emphasize, to Sylvia's point as well, is that the answer is the women sitting on this panel today, who have had this experience, who have gone and actively, I mean, you within what, 2 months or 1 month of this happening to you just said enough is enough. I'm going to change the law. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else, and if it does, I want to make sure they have access to resources. So going back to the original question that I asked all of you to contemplate, what would you do? After you've heard all of this, does anyone in the audience want to tell me what they would do? I mean, we all understand maybe freaking out is okay. I know that I probably would have had an anxiety attack myself. But anybody want to answer that? What would you do? I see a lot of sighs and it's overwhelming.
I still don't know what I would do.
Well, what do you,
Oh, sorry.
I don't think I would have the mental or emotional resilience to do what these women have done. I don't think I could do that. So you're really to be commended for what you've put in place for all the women and girls who experienced this after you. Thank you.
I would turn that back to you. You who have been through this, what do you suggest that we do so it doesn't happen? So how can we help? Yes.
I would say from my point of view, what I really needed and wished I had was people loudly and outwardly supporting me. I think misinformation, one of the women on my board, 𝗕𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗶𝗰, used to be the head of the Department of Homeland Security disinformation division that was very short-lived. And short-lived, and she had a very similar experience where Fox News kind of went after her when the Biden administration announced this new division being created. And instead of robustly defending her, calling her the czaress of disinformation and censorship, and I mean, really attacking her, and she got all of the things that the rest of us get, a ton of online abuse and doxing and stalking. And both she and I have had this conversation with each other. We wish that we had had the people that could have helped us or should have helped us come out and robustly defend us loudly and proudly, as opposed to allowing misinformation and violence to thrive in the shadows, because that's really where it thrives, right? So like, if what I wish I could have happen, and what if this happened again, what I would want, and it probably will happen again, what I would want is for people, organizations, individuals to come out and say, hey, no, absolutely not. Like, right, like this isn't how dare this woman have sex with her husband. It's how dare someone record it without her knowledge and consent. How dare a Republican operative, and again, I'm just using Democrat and Republican because that's how I ran, not meaning to bash Republicans. But how dare a Republican operative take this and shop this around in news organizations trying to change the outcome of an election that very well could determine abortion rights in Virginia, which is what they did, right? Like, but it was how dare her. And so I wish I had had organizations that had come out and individuals come out and not say that they didn't, right? Like they did. The repro groups really had my back, and people flew from all over the country to door knock for me and all of that, but I wish that I had had more of a robust defense of this is sexual violence, as opposed to just have at it, we're letting another woman just, and that was 𝗕𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀's experience too, right? She'll tell you, she wishes the Biden administration had more robustly defended her and supported her, as opposed to just kind of throwing her to the wolves.
yeah, I mean, Susanna, you said it perfectly. The amplification and the support of survivors and of those who are fighting this. I just want to explain a little bit about the way that I've been received and the way that I've had to navigate this issue. I mean, I've been fighting this publicly, as I said, for nearly a decade, not just in Australia. Actually, the most amount of work that I've actually done is in the US, all over the media. and I've had to fly all over the planet. And I've done a lot of this unpaid, and I have had very, very little support from the public as they've watched, you know, people attack me and just be completely unwilling to stand up and defend me. And I think supporting very loudly, as you said, the people that are fighting this is so needed, because it is so lonely to fight this battle, and people shouldn't have to be doing this and they're not getting the support that they need. But something that I would like to pass on a personal level in terms of what you can do as someone who is a brown woman, and understanding that this issue disproportionately affects people of colour, people with disabilities, people in the LGBTQI community. Really vulnerable, marginalised minorities are affected. You hear about Taylor Swift. The people who are really disproportionately affected are everyday people, everyday women who people don't give a shit about. So I would like for you to pay particular attention to the diverse voices, to uplift them, because they are the ones that are disproportionately overlooked. And, you know, for example, I was in a documentary in Australia, and I was featured alongside other survivor advocates who looked different from me, and we all were featured equally in time. Can you guess who publicly supported who and who was not supported at all? I was in that documentary, and I gave my time, my energy, and my unpaid labour. Who did the public not support? I'm brown. So that's my labour, that's my work, all over the planet. It's documented, you can Google it. So really get up and support the people, and also support the diverse voices who are often overlooked.
Thank you, Noelle. That's an excellent point. Many of these cases, we tend to focus on famous women when they happen, celebrity women, but the average everyday woman, as Susanna will tell you, trying to get images taken down is an utter nightmare. We are coming towards the end of the panel, and I do want to give Breeze and Andrea a chance to make some closing remarks.
Thank you so much for leading the way, Noelle. You were very inspiring. Yeah, I mean, Noelle is my inspiration. She's a firecracker. But let us remind ourselves, without women like Susanna and Noelle leading the way, we would never get here. And Noelle and Susanna, I think they have been fighting longer than I have. And but let's think about it. Not everyone wants to be a fighter. Sometimes the teenagers just wanted to hide, and they wanted hide away from the world, and not to think about it ever. And they should have that option. So for those of us who are willing to fight and have the the ability, and not to mention the the energy to fight. I mean, I think it's really brave for all of us to speak up. But I feel like for the average ordinary day-to-day people, I hope Alecto AI could provide first line of defense for them, so that when they want the images down, we can help them to take down immediately. And that's what technology is there for. And I do believe that we can use tech for good, and the same algorithm used to that were used to harm us can be redirected to protect us. And and I will leave with that, because I am very hopeful. And even though I'm reminded every day how privileged I am to be in this position and to have a voice, but I hope that the solution that I created can help millions of others, and so that one day no one will ever have to die from violence that happened online. And do not let my yesterday become the children's future. Yeah.
So speaking of children, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I got a call in the fall from her teacher. She's in 5th grade on a small coastal town outside of San Diego, and the teacher says, your daughter just taught the whole class what deepfake abuse is.
Uh-oh. Been reading mommy's computer again, have you? So I go to the school to pick up my activist child, and as we're walking away, I was like, so Veronica, before we get into kind of the consequences part of this discussion, care to share what inspired this impromptu class you taught? And she said, because mommy, the boys use the tablets to take pictures of us girls and we tell them no, and then they draw boobies on us and make fun of us. And I told the teacher, and the teacher said, that's just what boys do. I was like, I'm sorry, did I just hit my head and wake up in 1972? So I was like, okay, so we turned back around, went back to the school, walked up to the principal, who at this point, at the sight of me, started shaking. Because this is our first little go-around last year after the sextortion that she taught. The point is, it would have been so easy to not ask the question. Why, Veronica? Although I'm used to it by now. I think as we're looking at what we're seeing online, at the core is why. And this sounds cheesy. My late mentor who passed away last year ran something called the Kindness Cloud. And this sweet elderly man posted pictures of 𝗦𝗂𝗀𝗄 and whatnot every day online and tagged me in all of them. So I was like, and so, but he was right. As much hate as there is out there online, what you can do is spread kindness. When you see something that you think is non-consensual intimate images or just hatred online, either report it, definitely don't reshare it. I mean, I don't think you wouldn't be here if you were like that. But, you know, really calling things out, and I'll close with this. I got started in a new role a couple of years ago, and I'm no longer at, right around the time that Amber Heard and Mr. Depp were in court in Virginia. Here we are again. And I use Amber and Mr. Depp because I don't even want to like humanize the things he's done. But regardless of what happened in the actual relationship, that's a separate thing. Although drawing things with blood on your fingers is super weird. What struck me is I'd be in a coffee shop or an airport or wherever, and I'd hear men and women saying the most horrible things about Amber. And it kind of broke down into three camps. The fat cow camp, which that's mean, that's not very nice. The something bad should happen to Amber camp, and then the deep fake abuse of her and her 2-year-old daughter. So, as you can see, it escalated. There are this one analyst found over 1 million retweets of intimate image abuse of Amber on what is known as X. What I think we're aiming for is 1 million people standing up and saying that's wrong. And I'll close with that.
That's powerful, power by numbers. Thank you all for attending today. Your attention to this matter is much appreciated. But not only much appreciated, and I'm going to stand up when I say this, but we want to emphasize that if this happens to you or anyone you know, you have places to go. You have women, Certify AI and Alecto AI, developing technologies that will combat this, or at least attempt to, and finally get it right, hopefully. And then you have an organization called Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, which is run by a group of lawyers and legal scholars that can point you in the right direction. You have Susanna's organization, My Own Image, that has information on how to file DMCA takedown requests. So you are not alone, and I do want to close with that. Thank you all. Have a wonderful time at CSW.